Buffalo authorities say the 18-year-old white supremacist behind Saturday's mass shooting posted a manifesto to Google Docs 2 days before the attack. It was filled with dozens of pages of racist and anti-Semitic content and repeatedly cited the Great Replacement theory. That's a racist conspiracy often pushed by white supremacists that falsely alleges white people are being replaced in America by racial, ethnic, and religious minorities. In recent years, it's been amplified by Republican politicians, operatives, and pundits, including none other than Fox News' Tucker Carlson.
In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries. The left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true.
Though the likes of Tucker Carlson have helped move this racist and violent message into the mainstream, they didn't invent it. Writer and culture critic Michael Harriot says, although it's convenient to believe that this current racial backlash is an outlier, American history is pockmarked with racial violence sparked by the fear of whiteness becoming extinct. And Michael Harriot joins us now, also with us, Kurt Bardella, a Democratic advisor. And Michael, expand on the idea that this type of racist violence is not new at all. It is not brand new and is actually pretty ordinary in the context of American history.
Yes. So when we look at history, we see like the greatest period of racial terrorism in American history, Reconstruction, was sparked by this fear that, in South Carolina, in Mississippi, and Louisiana, those were majority non-white states after, the 14th Amendment made freedmen and African-American citizens of the country, and that's what sparked the violence of Reconstruction. So, the nuance in this, although people have termed it as a conspiracy theory, the demographic changes in America are true, right? Like white people are going to be a minority in the next few years. That is, a demographic inevitability. But the idea that there is a conspiracy by the leftists or the liberals or, the Illuminati to take white people out of the majority, to introduce immigrants and black people and to give them power, that is the conspiracy theory. And I think that we should acknowledge that there's kind of a nuanced difference between the two, but it's always been a fear since the beginning of America of a non-white majority taking over this country that they stole from the indigenous people of America, of course.
Exactly. And I think it's an important point to say that, it's a resistance to racial progress, the perceived racial progress of specifically Black Americans in this country, but also in this current moment of sort of the collective of Black Americans, AAPI voters and Latino voters. Tucker Carlson, he's not the only Republican to push this kind of racist rhetoric and these theories. At least Stefanik, the number 3 House Republican, pulled from the Great Replacement theory for a campaign ad. How should the GOP own their complicity in a moment like this one?
Well, Zerlina, we see it every day. In their silence, the Republican Party is owning the Elise Stefaniks, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Paul Gosars, the Matt Gaetzes, the Madison Cawthorns, in their refusal to do the easy, obvious, layup thing, condemn racism, condemn hate crimes, condemn violence, and their refusal to do so, they are acquiescing, they are condoning, they are endorsing. Make no mistake about it, the Republican Party is organized racism at this point. They have manifested their racism into policies designed to hold down minorities in this country. They have done so in ways that we don't even talk about day in and day out. Look what they did during the Trump years with the United States Census. The very process we use to determine representation in this country, they manipulated to try to hold down communities of color, try to hold down the count of communities of color. Everything that we see from this Republican Party is born from this insane and dangerous notion that they are going to demographically be in the minority by 2035. And everything we've seen since that data has come out has been designed to try to hold that off and keep their power in their hands.
I mean, Michael, one of the things I ask myself when I think about that fact, right, that America is moving towards a majority non-white electorate, you know, like I heard that data and I was like, great, that means that we're all going to have a place in this particular democracy. That means we all can participate. But I also noted in my book, and I called a whole chapter The White Resistance, that there was going to be resistance to that because of America's history. I mean, we're seeing now in this moment a backlash against critical race theory and the accurate teaching of American history. I mean, do you think that if we're actually teaching kids that historically in America, every time black people make progress politically, economically, socially, they're met with white terrorism and white violence as a response?
You know, it's obvious that we don't. That's the push behind these entire slate of anti-CRT laws. And what, you know, Kurt said is important in that, like, we can point at the white supremacist violence and condemn that as white supremacy. But we also have to acknowledge that the gerrymandering of maps, the, you know, subterfuge that went on with the census, the anti-CRT laws, they are forms of the same thing. And they are also based on that same fear of a non-white majority. You know, when you think about the resistance that you spoke of in your book and that you spoke of a few moments ago, you have to ask yourself, like, why would someone who was not racist be concerned that there would be a non-white majority unless they thought that the non-white majority's political ideology and their social and economic ideology conflicted with the white majority, though the majority of white people vote Republican, and no other ethnic and demographic constituency in America does. And there is a reason for that, and that is what stems this great fear that white people are being replaced. It's not just whiteness, it is the advantages that whiteness gives them.
I think that's such an important point, Kurt, because I think that what we do in this moment is, you know, everybody's like, oh, Tucker Carlson, or you can condemn this specific act of violence and separate yourself from it because you're not engaged in that type of explicit hatred and racism. But let's talk about the ways in which white supremacy is baked in here in terms of the way, to Michael's point, redistricting essentially eliminates black districts like in Florida right now. And the fact that essentially the response to the demographic shifts is to minimize the political power that those communities, people of color, black people, Latinx people, are that power that's growing right now.
I mean, let's be clear here. The Republican Party has essentially and effectively been hijacked by these predominantly white people who use these delusional grievances, and their grievance being that communities of color are getting ahead in America and growing and expanding. They use them to try to radicalize a large segment of this country. And so when you talk about what the Republican Party really is for, they're for forced pregnancy. Well, who does that really hit? That hits communities of color, the disenfranchised, economically disadvantaged people. They're for banning books. What books? Books that tell the true story about the American story. They're for reversing voting rights. Who is that designed to hit? That's designed to stop communities of color from voting because they are growing as a voting bloc in America. And what does that all ultimately lead to? It leads to a violent insurrection, an attempt to overthrow the will of the people because communities of color, their voices were heard in states like Georgia, and these white Republicans don't like the outcome of it. And so they use these white grievances as a justification to perpetrate violence and mayhem against the rest of us.
Kurt Bardella and Michael Harriot, grateful to both of you for this really important conversation. Thank you both again for being here. Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.